Well, as we commemorate International Human Rights Day, we highlight the plight of women, particularly the roles that they've played in the fight for liberation right here in South Africa, where in fact many have been diminished or untold. Our radio personality Thabiso Sikwane is embarking on a project to unearth and archive the untold stories of the women activists of June 1976. Well, Thabiso Sikwane joins us to unpack further. A very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us here tonight.
Dumela, Lisa, thank you for having me.
Thabiso, as we celebrate International Human Rights Day, why is this particular project so important to you?
I've always had a fascination as a child, having been raised by a woman who was a social worker. Dr. Zebe was my aunt, and she raised me, and there were always conversations around, conversations about what was happening in our country. Part of her work as a social worker was very community-oriented, and I was always surrounded by women who were doing things, and I later got to understand what they were actually doing. There were times I remember growing up where there would be people in the house, young people in the house, and having been an only child at that time, for me, these people were company that was coming in, just to keep me company for a week or two, sometimes a month. And these people would never be permanent. And I always wondered, why are these people coming and going? And there's much conversation. When I'd ask, for instance, what are you doing? Who are you? And these are not relatives, family members. And it always stuck in my mind. I got introduced by my aunt, Dr. Zebe, to books at a very young age, in my early high school years, a book by Mama Fatima Mir called Higher Than Hope, about the life of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela. The book by Mama Ellen Kuzwayo, a Kombi woman, may their souls rest in peace. So I got introduced to the stories of women from a young age, and I've always wanted to find out more about these women. I got to meet Mama Ellen Kuzwayo, and I was blessed to have been able to meet her. And then, I don't know if you can see the poster behind me, I would always look at posters of the struggle or, particular events, but I had a fascination with 1976 for some reason. And this poster behind me and others, where I'd see girls marching and protesting as well, where I'd see lifeless bodies of boys and girls. And growing up then, in my broadcasting career, I looked back at how every time we commemorated June 16th, I would be interviewing men. When I talked about it, when I Googled and read about information, the information was predominantly about men. And 2 years ago, when I was still working at Kaya FM, I asked the producer of the show, then DJ Keys, to ask with my team as well. I was co-presenting with David O'Sullivan and Jason Goliath at the time, to say, can I look for the women of June 16th, and we do the commemoration in that way. And so I started a journey where I made phone calls. One phone call led to a barrage of other phone numbers that led to a whole lot of continuous conversations, finding out that so many of them have not yet told the stories. So many of them, we don't know their names. So many of them have also passed away, and we've not recognized their stories. And there's tremendous amounts of work that have been done acknowledging the silencing of women's voices and the omission of their contributions in a lot of our literature. But academic work has been done by some incredible women. Professor Akola comes to mind, Pumla Akola comes to mind, among the many women in terms of gender studies in some faculties in tertiary institutions. A lot of work has been done broadly, recognizing that and even getting conversations about that. But what this project is aiming at is to produce and create a database of women, all women from all walks of life, from the rural areas, from Soweto, from Cape, from everywhere all over the world, because we also have not been taught, and it has not been documented widely enough, that June 1976 was not isolated to Soweto only, that it spilled over to other parts of the country.
Thabiso, you're speaking about this database and also, about the importance of representation at large for women and men. I wonder, as you've unearthed some of the information, what lessons have been drawn by digging up from the past? Understanding our contemporary reality, we do need to look back and reflect. And as we, begin to see the realities of oppression and sexism and trauma historically imposed, how has that been perpetuated and maintained to date?
I'm so happy that you mentioned the issue of trauma, because one of the glaring aspects that keep coming up with the conversations with, Bomme is how a lot of them carry to this day this trauma, how a lot of them, because they don't speak about this, it's not something that is focused on in their lives, because some of them came from detention, some of them came from solitary confinement, came back from exile, and life had to go on where there was no debrief, there was no focus on taking care of me, let me heal. And one of the intentions of the program is to have conversations with women about getting a process such as a TRC, a similar process to that focuses on women and the healing, because one of the statements that was made by one of the mothers was that the womb is bleeding. And we cannot expect a normal society when, as a society broadly, there's a lot of intergenerational trauma that has been passed on from generations back. And so part of the project is also to have conversations about that sort of mechanism and vehicle being created, so that our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, our mothers can actually have a way of being able to heal, some form of restitution and restoration of their dignity from that perspective. So I cannot divorce the traumas that we see today as a country, what is being happening to women, and divorce it from what has happened in the past, whether politically or familiarly. It's all intertwined as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, absolutely, Thabiso. I think just in the interest of time, there's obviously so much more to unpack. But when we look at the processes that you have undergone, I mean, how difficult was it to piece the information together? And perhaps, should people want to get in touch with you and share their stories, how do they go about doing that?
The first part of your question, it hasn't been difficult at all, because so many of these women are wanting to talk. They have not. A lot of them have not spoken about their stories. There are, I'm happy to say, there are groupings of women who are doing things such as projects. Mama Mahauta Molefe, who was a detainee at John Foster, the women who were detained at John Foster, whose stories have not been documented as well. She's done an incredible documentary called Surviving John Foster, for instance, that she did out of her own pocket and with support here and there from people. And that's an incredible story that needs to be told. And the documentary needs to be done and produced and supported because she did this out of her own volition and passion. But getting the stories is not a problem at all, because our mothers want to talk their stories. They want to have issues addressed. A lot of them have had the difficulty of raising children, trying to live normal lives, having started life abnormally as young women, as girls, as young as 14. If people, have stories about their own family members, it may be even activists themselves, if they want to share their stories. We've created a Facebook page called She is 1976. That's the name of the project. And people can also send, via email. We will be creating a WhatsApp group as well, so that people can send via WhatsApp, because that might be easy. But we want all the stories in the same way that to this day, a database and the details of, the victims of the Holocaust in terms of the Jewish community are still being collected to this day, so many years later. The dream is that this database gets as many names as possible. And regardless of how you are linked to the 1976 period and the years after, I'm not only talking about the activists, I'm talking about the nurses who were taking care of, victims, who were taking care of the injured, the women who housed the children as they were running away from the police and hiding them. Every single woman, the women who were running the puzzle shops, where the students had to go and get food and get drinks, those that were tear gas having to be assisted to hide. Every single woman that was impacted by or was involved in 1976 needs to be a part of She's 1976 as a project.
Thabiso, let's leave the conversation there. Kia leboga. Thank you very much for your time.